And to start our discussion, I would like to suggest a few statements based on the first panel discussion and ask my panelists to agree or disagree. So with corporate sustainability due diligence or without, we have a strong business and human rights framework. With omnibus happen or not, BHR issues should be part of accession process. And rule of law issue is definitely about corporate sustainability framework as well. And it's also part of the uncertainty today. And what is happening in the European Union today is also about the rule of law environment. And it's also not a good message for candidate countries, which I experience a lot of issues related to the rule of law, about all this unpredictability and all these issues related to governance and transparency and everything what was discussed. And competitiveness should not mean competitive benefits for irresponsible businesses, but what tools could be used to support responsible companies in this competition. And also smart mix measures was mentioned several times, but is smart mix measures smart without mandatory human rights due diligence? And yeah, basically, probably we can start with that. And I would like to give this floor, and not give the floor, we have another format today. But I would like to address the first question to Lyra Jakuleviciene. She is the chair of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, and also she is dean of the law school in Mykolas Romeris University. It's always pleasure for me to share that the cooperation between Yaroslav Mudriyi National Law University and Mykolas Romeris University, I don't know, has probably 2 decades or something like that. And yeah, so Lyra, in times of these uncertainties, what should be the key, orienters for candidate countries? And also I would like to ask you, because Lithuania in many cases is very important friend for Ukraine as well, and your experience of accession process, is it the same as we go through now? What changes, what lessons learned you can share with us in terms of corporate sustainability, business and human rights issues?
Thank you, Olena. Yes, hello to everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's also a privilege to be on this very nice occasion on which I would like also to congratulate both the university, the law group, but of course very dear colleagues, Nadia and Olena, very active colleagues in this field. And it's really a pleasure to see the leadership that you extend to this very complex, very complicated, as we see, and also nowadays not one of the very popular fields, so to say. So really great appreciation for that. Now, Olena, what you raised as questions for me, it's very risky, because I wear 2 hats, and I can speak as the member of UN Working Group, of course, the group that is behind the UN guiding principles, but also my own experience in 2004, actually my own experience even earlier, before accession of Lithuania. And this was the biggest, let's say, group of countries that were joining the European Union in 2004. And actually the situation was very, very different from what we have now, and in particular when we speak about the commitments in human rights. So in addition to the statements that you raised, let me also maybe speak and raise three statements. So first statement that I would like to raise, which goes a little bit along with what you were asking, is it going to continue if there is something wrong with mandatory legislation? So the issue that it's a much broader context, and actually this is what we also have to be guided by, that it's not only mandatory legislation. Indeed, in particular in the Central and Eastern Europe region, in the Balkan countries, when we have mandatory legislation, companies and states are more sort of favorable, and progress can be easier achieved. But again, this is, the context is broader. So the first statement that I would say, the context is broader, and there has been evolution, let's say, from voluntary or non-mandatory initiatives or standards to mandatory ones. But we should not disregard also the other standards. Then, secondly, if we look at the human rights commitments generally in the European Union and in the accession process, this is not only about industry or just about Green Deal. It's again, it's much broader context. And third statement that I would like to make is what do you have in the law? So even if you have mandatory legislation, you can have very nice laws, but if you don't have implementation, then of course the nice laws is not really an end solution. So let me dwell on these three points that I would like to make. And many of the things that I also wanted to say goes as a follow-up also to the first panel, because a number of those issues have been already raised. So firstly, when we speak about mandatory legislation and let's say acceleration of the progress on the basis of that, this is of course good, but if we look at the challenges and in particular in the accession countries and the region that I'm covering, Central and Eastern Europe, we still have quite low awareness. Indeed, there is still quite a lot to be done on non-mandatory aspects. And for example, UNGPs, UN guiding principles, we're still not there. We are still not compliant with that. So how can we talk about mandatory legislation when we are still not there with the other initiatives? There is some strange perception also that sometimes we hear that indeed this has been an evolution. So we had something voluntary, non-mandatory. Now we are with mandatory legislation. So somewhat that mandatory legislation has replaced everything what was in before that. And I must say that this is not correct to say, because indeed the mandatory legislation and the directive that is in focus today is based on those international standards that have existed before the directive. And indeed, whatever will happen to the directive, going back to the statement that you made, if I agree or not, I agree, of course, with your statement that whatever would happen to the directive, still there is the whole body of mandatory, non-mandatory, semi-mandatory standards that are still relevant, and that we need not to forget about them. And about UNGPs themselves, there is always this perception that they are sort of non-mandatory, and now we have the directive which is mandatory. But if we look at the first pillar, of course, all the state duties, they are based on international legal framework, which is mandatory. So there is a big discussion that we can enter into what is mandatory and what is not mandatory. But what is clear that if we progress with those voluntary standards, in particular UNGPs, if we align our policies and practices with UNGPs, then of course this can help us in the accession process to align with those European Union policies. Now, on the second point, that human rights and the European Union are much broader than just business and industries. Now, I tried to, to see where these issues could fit in the revised negotiation framework, the so-called 6 clusters for the negotiations. And indeed, I could say that there was none where the human rights would not fit. Of course, if we add businesses, probably then the Green Deal, the industries, but also it's part of the fundamentals. And if sometimes we say that, well, this will be the issue for the further, indeed, human rights is part of the fundamentals. And here, what has been already mentioned, that the issues of rule of law, the issues of human rights, strengthening of democratic institutions, it's even an issue for European Union itself. And now we are requiring the accession countries to really be ahead with those issues. And this is something where it's different from, let's say, the last accession, because since the last accession, the European Union has developed a number of mandatory instruments, like Article 7, for example, with regard to rule of law. The Court of Justice also made sure that what is preached about rule of law also became a reality and is part of the practice. So the requirements are much, much stricter, even though in the EU itself, we have some challenges. So this is going to be challenging because I think it will relate also to the political commitment to uptake those issues. But I think what is important is not just to stick to particular, let's say, area where the directive is working, but to look at the broader area, because human rights is part, human rights and environment is part of all the 6 negotiating clusters. And I know that the time is short, so just briefly to dwell on the last one, last statement that I mentioned, that indeed the accession has certain limitations. Accession criteria have certain limitations. We look at the legislation, we look at the institutions, but what is important that it does not become like a checklist. The same with the directive, that it does not become a checklist. So that's why, yes, some persons here in the room were invoking more moral aspects, ethic aspects. I think we all need to think about implementation. What is necessary for the implementation? So first of all, when we look at the subject itself, it's very interdisciplinary. So if we look at the institutional framework in the countries, what is important is that there would be cooperation between different ministries. We see the example of MFA in the Netherlands, but it's also very important that all the line ministries also cooperate. In particular, the Ministry of Education also, because we need to educate people if we want really this to be embedded in sustainability as our way of life, as our economies and so on, and not just one or another instrument. So interinstitutional cooperation, this is very important. Competencies, I think it's very important to invest in competencies, and academics nowadays are very competent. There is the whole issue of the market. There are lots of consultancies born, let's say, in this field, which again, sometimes the companies are not very happy about. But again, this serves for education, and this is what is necessary. So I think we need to think not only at the legislative level, but to see what needs to be done at the level of the implementation. This is very important, so that we don't remain just with the checklist. So this is just to start
just
with.
to start, yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, very good points, all of them. And basically also you mentioned about international obligations of the states, and these obligations, of course, are mandatory. And basically these obligations are about the duty to protect, but could states be effective in duty to protect without mandatory human rights due diligence? It's about, you know, correlations, race awareness, and mandatory legislation. What eggs, what chickens? I don't know really. And that's why I want to ask Siniša. Siniša Milatovic is a business and human rights specialist, UNDP, and I should say Sonja can tell us about Serbian experience. But from Ukrainian perspective, I should say that UNDP is one of the key supporters of changes that we have in Ukraine, and in particular Siniša participate actively what are happening in Ukraine also. And but Siniša is a global expert and experience of other countries. So what you can tell us about different regions? What is the reaction on changes in EU corporate sustainability framework? Do they feel they are ready to these changes? Do they feel they will be impacted by these changes? What is the reaction?
Thanks, Olena. Hi, everyone. First of all, from my end as well, congratulations to Nadia, Olena, the Wageningen, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Law Center for organizing this event and for the launch of the Center of Excellence. So when it comes to your question, UNDP works in over 40 countries on business and human rights. That number has grown from 0 10 years ago, but from 10 about 3 years ago. And that number is growing steadily. That's pretty much it. Yes, 5 years ago, I'm solely responsible. The number is growing year on year. And in these countries, we do a mix of things. Some of it has to do with essentially supporting states in adopting policies and so on. But some of it is training businesses. So in the last couple of years, we've trained over 2,000 businesses on human rights due diligence. So what I'm going to tell you is not necessarily, based on quantitative research, but it is a kind of an impression of the work that we're doing with businesses across the world. And that is that, there is definitely, it's not the most exciting answer, but there's a lack of awareness of knowledge generally of the UNGPs. So never mind the CS3D, never mind change of activities and all these detailed terms and so on. We're talking about distinguishing what is corporate social responsibility and what is essentially business and human rights, for lack of a better term. So let's start with that. We have a lot of companies that we train tell us, yes, but we, donated laptops to a school. Isn't that of fulfilling our responsibilities and so on? So we have to start from that, to quote a former member of the UN Working Group, Dante Pesce, who used to say doing the ABCs, and there really is an element of that, of sort of raising awareness. Which is very important, which is really, crucial because a lot of companies are still unaware. What does it mean? What is the responsibility to respect human rights? What is human rights due diligence? And so on, all of these steps. And so we try to impart that upon them. Second, I think it's a challenge is that, a lot of countries seen this as an imposition from the outside, as an imposition from the EU, as an imposition, even though UNGPs are a global standard, but even there it's seen as somehow as a standard that's propagated by, the global north and so on. And so there's a need, we associate, let's say, consumer-led movements with the global north. But there's a need to support, there are consumer-led movements in the global south too. There are student-led movements, there's youth-led movements, there really are movements, and we try to support those. So for instance, in Southeast Asia and in Asia, we have an ongoing project called Agents of Change, where we support youth, media, academia in working basically to, call on businesses, hold them accountable, to call for policy and legislative changes and so on. Because it's not only here in the global north that you have consumer-led, youth-led movements, etc. And there's a need to support those. It's not only businesses here that should be held to account for their lack of respect of human rights. Third, I'm going to cite some figures, and I'm going to try and do something tricky. UNDP did a survey in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. So, and by UNDP, I mean Olena. So I'm going to go back to the moderator. Olena and UNDP did a survey over the past 9 months or so on the readiness of businesses for the CS3D. So around 200 businesses filled in a questionnaire, and you see from the results a kind of a confusion where a lot of business. So this wasn't a random sample. We didn't have the means to go and knock on doors of businesses. So even by definition, these are businesses that think that they're well prepared. And the results are that when you see the answers, I mean, I'm not going to quote you, figured the report will come out soon, but essentially they say, yes, we're well-versed in human rights due diligence, we're well-versed in stakeholder engagement and so on. And then when you drill deeper, and I mean, literally one level below, so, apply the corporate human rights benchmark methodology, look at what they're actually doing, the results are, there's a wide divergence between what they think they're doing and what they're doing, or what they claim they know and they actually know. And I mean, some of these answers are probably bad faith, but some of them are not bad faith. Some of them are actually given in good faith. They just think that this is what, CSR, again, to come back to this confusion between CSR and human rights due diligence is. So you have, if you look at EU candidate countries, the same goes for them. There's sort of a confusion as to what this is. There's a newness to it. And then there's the sort of, Heidi was mentioning the geopolitical sort of aspect to this, Ukraine, Serbia, there's a sort of an associated hypocrisy with some of the EU's values and so on, when in fact, for instance, in Serbia, where I come from, but I mean, I'm commenting more globally, Sonja will talk about this, but there's a huge deposit of lithium, which has drawn a lot of attention from, the automotive industry in Europe and so on. And actually, you see the EU being very supportive of the Serbian government at the moment, which is, suppressing the right to protest and freedom of assembly, and the EU not voicing a peep. So all of that being said, just to say that there is actually a bit of a disconnect between what EU values are, because when you talk about EU values and you think about the CS3D and other laws on corporate sustainability, that sounds grand. And then it kind of hits a wall when you talk about, geopolitics and so on, and real considerations around critical minerals and critical materials, etc. So just to sort of draw a bow on it, I think that there is, there's a lot of work to be done. Businesses you can't say that they're ready. I don't think they're ready in Europe either, but, I think that they're at the stage where there needs to be a kind of a broader case made to them as to what this is and also why it's good for them. And that comes back to also the previous panel, more empirical research is needed on why this is good for them. This whole idea of, I know that I'm a human rights lawyer. I don't want to make a big deal out of a business case for human rights, but for businesses, there does need to be a business case for human rights. So is there one? What industries is it confined to? What particular countries, et cetera, et cetera? There needs to be more sort of research done into that, because otherwise all we're left with are anecdotal examples where we approach businesses and we tell them, this is good for you. We've heard of businesses who've done this and have profited, but, I think they're looking for something a bit more tangible. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much. And just announcement of the second part of the day. We also have Daria Nahaevska is here, and she conducted survey of Ukrainian companies, what Ukrainian companies think about the corporate sustainability due diligence directive. So stay tuned. And my next question to Maryna Kupchuk. Maryna Kupchuk, basically, she is responsible for accession of Ukraine to corporate sustainability framework. No, it's really an issue. Maryna represents Ministry of Economy of Ukraine, Department of Investments, and also Maryna is the secretary of the OECD National Contact Point in Ukraine. And we met first in 2017, and basically since those time we are in permanent contact, daily contact, right? And my question to you, Maryna, what changed during this time, during these years, and what was done, and what challenges you see, and what support do you need from all of us?
Thank you very much, Olena. Thank you very much for invitation me to this very interesting, very useful discussion for Ukraine, of course. Yes, actually, I represent Ministry of Economy, but my main responsibilities is implementation RBC issue into the national policy and national contact point activities. And in this context, now we are working in in several directions, which are important for this implementation, for integration into European Union. And the first one is developing national legislation, improving national legislation, or including RBC topics into the national legislation. So last year we included this issue of human rights protection and RBC into the Ukraine facility plan. And this was very, very important. It was like first step of, I would like to say, probably it was the first, not law, like legislation where we included this issue. Then we include this topic into the strategy of SME and action plan of this strategy, and now we started this work with SMEs, and it includes like recommendations, like consultation, some tools for SMEs. The one more legislation, this is environmental compact. Actually, Ministry of Environment is responsible for this recommendation within the environmental compact, but in fact we, like Ministry of Economy, we took this main role, main responsibility for developing this national action plan of implementation RBC standards. So we are waiting now of this regulation from Ministry of Environment, and then we will start this work. But now we are already discussing this question because we also have our concept of government policy on development social responsibility, and we have action plan, and now we are discussing this question that we need to of course update this action plan, or we need to develop one plan, not two plans. So it's still in our discussions. And the next direction is raising awareness of government representatives of government authorities. It's very, very important because we know the role of government in RBC implementation and RBC promotion. And next year we had 2 surveys for government authorities, and based on these services, we developed with UNDP, United Nations Development Program in Ukraine, and some civil society organization, we developed study program, and we organized in March the first like pilot project and for civil servants, and actually we didn't expect it, so we didn't expect so big interest from from our colleagues. It's and very, very, very nice, very good. So and one more, this is raising awareness between business. As well, we also planning to have this business school for businesses, and in particular for SMEs. And we also didn't expect so high interest of business, because business is we all have in Ukraine, the main goal is to integrate into European Union, to become a member of OECD, and this is why we are all very interested in how to do it, where we are, what is our next steps. This is very successful, I guess, for us. And one more direction, this is international cooperation. We also had we launched some project last year. The first one, we signed a memorandum of understanding with Danish Institute of Human Rights, yes, and it focuses on human rights and sustainable finance, and we have already had some workshop and also for government authorities, and we are planning together to develop some tools for companies and some workshops and as well. The one more, this is memorandum of understanding with United Nations Development Program of Ukraine. Is in Ukraine, it's also focused on implementation RBC and in particular human rights into the national policy and activities. And one more very important also project, we launched a cooperation project with Swedwatch. This is a Swedish civil society organization, and there are also several directions. First of all, it's capacity building of national contact point, because of course we have this challenge with lack of human resources, and we are planning to develop some like advisory body to support national contact point. And the second one is also developing some tools, some sectoral guidelines for more important sectors in Ukraine, and also like cooperation with another national contact point and experience took experience from a national contact point from of Sweden and Norwegian and so.
You should visit Dutch national contact.
Dutch.
I think.
So we have many plans. Actually, like Ministry of Economy, we also in the Ministry of Economy we responsible for coordinating and monitoring some topics within the Ministry of Economy of OECD program, and also just last month we joined this process of implementing CSDDD and CSR issues within the process of European Union integration. So actually we have so many challenges, so many plans, but it's very. We also will have in March this discussion about CSDDD implementation. So we have many plans, and if speak about support, I would like to say that of course we have this support, and without the support of our colleagues from Institute, from UNDP, from OECD Working Party on Responsible Business Conduct, we actually have this great support. Yeah. But in context of CSDDD, of course we need some probably roadmap, because you know we just started this discussion with our businesses, with our colleagues, and now this situation around the directive, it makes us a bit confused.
Yes.
So this This is what we need at this moment.
Thank you so much, Maryna. I believe it's not easy to follow how many action plans we have in Ukraine, but we will provide you with overview. And and basically it's also interesting to refer to the first panel discussion. Alexandra told us that basically business and human rights should be a cross-cutting element, right? It's a horizontal policy, but also it's a little bit, surprising to find the right questions about corporate sustainability due diligence in different chapters. So it's also should be somehow navigated. But at the same time, I was surprised, personally, I was surprised that I didn't find any kind of references to responsible business conduct or business and human rights in the chapter 23 about basically fundamental human rights and justice. It's also interesting how to make it cross-cutting without such kind of confusions. But you, of course, there is a very important part of your work is about responsible business conduct, cooperation with OECD, and I know from our cooperation that OECD is a very important driver of positive changes in Ukraine. And I would like to ask Christine Kaufmann, who is chair of the OECD Working Party on Responsible Business Conduct, professor of public law, European and public international law at the Faculty of Law at the University of Zurich, how to leverage the OECD Responsible Business Conduct framework in candidate countries. What is your experience, and how all this uncertainty again around the EU corporate framework impact your work?
Thank you very much. Let me first join my colleagues in congratulating Nadia and you, Olena, but also the head of the law group for this wonderful initiative. As the former dean of the law faculty, I know what it means and I sympathize with you to get it established. I really think it's an excellent example of swarm intelligence happening here right now. Apologies for my voice. I hope it will stay with me for the rest of this panel. Now, in answering your question, I was actually asked before coming here, there's this omnibus legislation. What do you do now? And I thought, I don't really get the question. Where is the problem? And I think it's very important to take up the point that Lyra made, that Alexandra made, and Heidi. There is uncertainty, but there's also certainty. And it's certain that business impacts will continue. It's certain that business dilemmas will continue. And it's equally certain that we need to address them. Unfortunately, it's equally certain that we have instruments to do that. We have the UNGPs, we have the OECD guidelines, we have ILO standards, and they're not going away. And the next element I think we tend to forget while getting lost in the complexities of the CSDDD and all the details, the CSDDD builds on these instruments. So we really need to start with the basement. You don't build a house starting with the rooftop. And when discussing with candidate countries, I find it a lot easier to start with due diligence in the UNGPs, in the guidelines, than starting with the CSDDD. Because you have all sorts of arguments. You know, this is too complicated. I don't have the data for that. It's not relevant to get started. You need to understand the due diligence framework. And that also helps, and I think this is critical, to get a whole of government approach. That's the beauty of the guidelines. Because we have all the themes. We have environment, we have competition, we have technology, we have corruption. It's all there in one instrument. Now, having said that, we also went through the motion. When we updated the guidelines in 23, we thought, you know, you cannot preach coherence and not start with your own instrument. So we said, and I think it was a bit naive, maybe at the beginning, we want this update to be coherent with all OECD instruments out there that are relevant for RBC. And I thought there will be many, but I had no idea how many. And I think we all had no idea how much effort was needed to consult with other committees. But it was a beautiful exercise because it also forced the participating government to reach out to their colleagues. So once you start discussing the guidelines, you have a chapter called competition, and it doesn't take much of an effort to convince colleagues in another department, look, there's something actually called competition, so you better pay attention. And I think that really helps. And we also saw that in the Ukrainian context. So I think that's one of the 3 points I want to make. It really helps raising awareness. It helps understanding the CSDDD, and it does help to get started and get out of that complexity trap, as I would call it. So it's really a compass to navigate uncertainty, but to also navigate the issues that we know and the complexities and business dilemma. And maybe just so you are aware, we have Ukraine, obviously a candidate for EU accession, already a member of the Working Party. We also have Turkey. There was a question in the first panel, who is also an adherent to the guidelines. Now, all these adhering countries, they have to have a national contact point. That's a legally binding obligation. So there are 52 national contact points out there. And they have two functions, essentially. One is to handle complaints, which is very important for civil society. And the other one is to promote responsible business conduct. So they're like an outreach facet to civil society, but they're also an outreach opportunity to business. They do a lot, and I mean, I have to say, Ukraine is one of the most active national contact points. In these circumstances, would you believe? So when we do the annual report, we had a comment by one of the countries, a very big country, saying, you know, I had a hard time putting together what we all did, and it's a big country. So we came up with like 5 pages, and then I saw Maryna is submitting 12. And it really made everybody think, you know, what is going on and what do we need to do? And what is also important, it's not only the 52 countries that have access to this information. National contact points reach out way beyond these 52. They organize workshops. The Dutch NCP is an excellent example, with countries in the global south, with accession countries. So it's a source of information, but it's also a source for dialogue. And that brings me to the third point. I think Heidi said it in the beginning, the environment has changed dramatically. And we're not only facing so many complex issues, conflicts, we are also faced with a situation where we're short of places to discuss. It's difficult in the UN. It has become very difficult in many fora. And in this regard, I think the OECD has really a positive message to convey. We just had the Garment Forum last week, where many countries came together, policymakers, civil society, business, to discuss the current issues in the garment sector. So it's one of the few international fora that still works. And I'm sorry to say that, I wish it was different, but the good news is we have one. And I think it's not that well known that this is not a closed circle. I hear that many times, well, it's a club of the rich, it's only 38. Well, we are 52, but nevertheless, it's going way beyond that. It has really changed over the last years. And that helps a lot to foster coherence. Coherence within the government, discuss. And just to give you that example, I mean, we discussed last week about how to bring legislation in line with the CSDDD. We heard from countries in Asia not being a member to the OECD, not being an adherent to the guidelines, not being a member, obviously, of the European Union, being at full speed aligning their legislation with the CSDDD. And they said, you know, what do we do now? Because we don't know what's going to happen. So we stick with the OECD guidelines. If we do that, we cannot do anything wrong. We will be ready when the moment comes. And I think this is really, really important. Let me just check my note so that I don't forget anything. And I nearly forgot one of the most important new developments that's coming up. And that's what we call an inclusive platform for due diligence policy cooperation. It's a bit typical, the name. It's not that catchy, I have to say. Not yet there, believe it or not. And this is a result of a situation where we had many governments saying, look, we are all in for coherence. We even have a recommendation, again, with a very catchy title. And I need to focus now. It's a recommendation on the role of government in promoting responsible business conduct. It's about coherence. And government said, we're all in. And even the European Union signed the recommendation. But what do we do now? I mean, how do we do it? So we listed a few examples in the recommendation, but then we said we need to get practical. Not physical, but practical. So let's get practical and let's share best practices, let's share experience, let's also share what didn't work. And let's reach out beyond Paris. So there's the launch of this platform next month, where we will start with just collect what is out there in terms of policies, what is out there in terms of legislation, and also let's see what our first experiences on what works and what doesn't. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. What can I say? Imagine if Maryna would have one more person in national contact point. What would you have? And I have impression that in this country, probably UNDP is very active. I don't know. Sonja Tošković, Director of Belgrade Centre for Human Rights, and the Belgrade Centre for Human Rights has a very nice logo, but also it's very well known, very active, very important civil society organization in Serbia. And basically, I can share my personal experience when I was participant of the Raoul Wallenberg program in 2004. We had a visit to Serbia, and one institution that we visited was Belgrade Centre for Human Rights because of its importance. And my question to Sonja, because Sonja represents civil society organization, and we mentioned several times importance of civil society organizations for our topic. What is the experience of Serbia to promote responsible business conduct in very complicated environment, I would say. And basically, we are talking about corporate sustainability framework, all what is happening around, but we also need to talk about environment in our countries where we need to implement this. So Sonja, please, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, Olena, and thank you, first of all, both of you, and to Nadia for inviting me. And I'm very, very happy that actually Belgrade Centre for Human Rights is the partner on this 3 years project, and that we are also the part of the Center of Excellency that Nadia in the beginning explained to all of you. Now to reflect on the question, well, it is very complicated, especially right now, not only this year, but the previous years in Serbia, because the role of the civil society, especially in this context, is very questionable, because I think that in the first panel, very important sentence was reflected about the role of the civil society organization as a partner of the government, but also of the businesses. And I think this is the key, really. And in Serbia, we are experiencing in the last couple of years in this area is actually that first the government is slowly starting to recognize First of all, importance of the topic. And what Lyra said in the beginning, of course, there is a huge legal framework that is already in place, and it's obligatory internationally, nationally. And then there is the EU integration process where our framework is already deeply trying to be in line with the EU acquis. But this topic is still totally not recognizable from very important ministry. There is a Chamber of Commerce in Serbia, very well informed, very much involved. But why? Because of the German supply chain and the obligation that our country have regarding the companies working in Serbia and a huge export and import that Serbia have with Germany, which is important to underline here. Then there is I would say, resistance from the business community, especially towards civil society, because the context and the narrative in Serbia about civil society organization and human rights defenders is very negative. Not only negative, it's a huge pressure and attacks towards civil society. And the narrative is generally that we are all working for the West countries, that we are enemies, and that we will do harm also for the companies. So I think that this road map or road that we need to take towards to become a partner for the companies is really on the long term, and that we will need support there, because naturally this will not happen. Maybe because right now Serbia is in a huge political and social crisis. Maybe after this, and maybe some changes that we are expecting hopefully to happen in the years to come, maybe then the role also of the civil society will be different. But on one side, this, let's say, challenging environment, I would really say, and I really believe in that there is a huge role actually of the civil society in different, I would say, areas. We heard in the first panel and also from this panel that raising awareness is still one of the top priority also for Serbia, for the businesses, for the civil society, for academia, for the government. And I think there the role of the civil society is also to be prepared to educate their staff. And also what you're saying about when you're speaking about EU directives, same goes to Serbia, or not only Serbia, to all the countries which are, let's say, EU candidate country. Also, young people need to be educated in timely manner to be prepared for the implementation that is coming. So I think that also many of the civil society staff are also very connected to academia also in Serbia. So academia should be connected to, of course, EU academia and university and all these trends and the new topics, new themes, and the new lectures. Then I think the role, although maybe some of the businesses and the government doesn't like it, but the role of the watchdogs reporting and monitoring about state of play here in the business, human rights, due diligence, public procurement, it's very, very important. And this needs to continue. And also maybe not so much a lovely job that we are working, but providing free legal aid to the victims of the human rights violation also within the companies needs to continue and needs to be there. And I think that also civil society need to prepare for that, because it's very hard to access to the companies, and the workers need to know that there are some civil society that can provide free legal aid in different cases. And what I also totally agree, and we heard it from this panel and previous panel, multi-stakeholder dialogue. I think this is also very crucial, and that we are also part of that dialogue in our national context, but also in the international context. And I think that we should push more for that. So yeah, I will stop here and of course continue.
Yes, thank you so much. And basically, I I want to ask the audience, if you have questions, please raise your hands. But if you are still thinking about your questions, I have two to all of our panelists. Sonja mentioned about the role of civil society organizations as a watchdogs, but also I think Heidi mentioned that civil society organizations should be considered as a partners. And my question to all of you, but also to the audience, do businesses in our countries consider civil society organizations as partners? First of all, my questions goes to Sonja, but yeah, I would be happy to hear from other panelists as well.
Where for the context of Serbia, I can really say now no, because I don't think that they recognize us at all as anything right now. And I think what is important that for example, in Serbia, the Chamber of Commerce is recognizing civil society as a partner, as somebody who can actually provide different kind of training workshops, upgrading skills to join for different or to support their curriculums that they are already doing with the businesses. And I think this is the first step, actually. And I think that we had a lot of work ahead of us, especially because we want to offer to the businesses our knowledge, our services, not first of all as a watchdog organization. This is what we do. But I think that this is only way or only pathway that we can use in Serbia in this context and in this moment.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Any other comments about civil society organizations?
Maybe just a small comment. What we hear from businesses is, of course, there are always good examples, there are bad examples, but those businesses that maybe do not have that much experience, but would like to actually believe in cooperation with civil society, and in particular where the companies do not have knowledge, but they want to do to understand how to embed those human rights aspects in their business operations, products, services. The challenge that they bring to the table is how to actually select to whom to work, because this is an area that captures, yes, environment, human rights, good governance issues, various other aspects. And it's sometimes quite difficult to find organizations that would deal with a number of issues. And I don't know if it's always best to deal with organizations for businesses that are responsible for a number of issues, or if they are specialized. You know, it's always a dilemma. But I think it's a challenge for businesses also how to select with whom to work. Yeah, so that's what I also wanted to bring.
Thank you very much, Christine.
Thank you. I just wanted to add an example of during the pandemic. We had lots of discussions, obviously, with business, and we did a small study, and it turned out that businesses who had a regular institutionalized relationship with stakeholders did much better getting through the pandemic. Even if they had to take very unpopular measures, they knew whom to talk about, you know, reducing working hours or sometimes increasing working hours depending on the product they were manufacturing. And that was an interesting experience. So generally speaking, when we talk to business, we often hear we first had to get it wrong in order then to say, well, we don't want to go through that again. So can we find a way to establish an ongoing dialogue? I think that's, in our experience, that's really key, to have that permanent relationship, even though it can be really difficult to identify the relevant partners.
Yeah, Maryna?
Yes, I would like to say that in Ukraine, I think the civil society organization play a crucial role, especially in the topics of human rights. And we had a very close relation with some civil society, like CSR Center, when we just joined to OECD guidelines, and when we created a national contact point, and we had very successful
support of Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Yes, yes, sure. And now also we cooperate with some civil society organization, and it's really very important. I think, yes.
Thank you so much. Okay, do we have questions from the audience? Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Stanislav Gubenko. I'm doing a PhD at University of Luxembourg. And my question is quite narrow. It's about Serbian context. So in late 2023, I talked to some officials at the Ministry of Human and Minority Rights Social Dialogue in Serbia. And I was told that Serbia was developing National Action Plan, Business and Human Rights. But I was also surprised after hearing that the ministry, it was not the competence of the ministry to handle any complaints regarding potential human rights violations coming from, for example, infrastructure projects, which is my focus of study. In this regard, I have two questions. First is maybe you could advise on the state of development of National Action Plan, Business and Human Rights, and if you have any information also about Bosnia and Herzegovina. Yes, it's quite difficult to find any information about this. And second, is there any specialized state entity in Serbia which could actually deal with any complaints, any issues of regarding human rights in infrastructure projects, if you know? Thank you very much.
Yeah, any other questions? Yeah, please, Martijn.
Martijn Scheldema from Erasmus University. Thank you for all your valuable and excellent insights. And I think also emphasizing the importance of the underlying frameworks, which I'm afraid many of my legal practitioner colleagues do not always recognize. But my question relates to due diligence and smaller companies, because we have been consulting the European model classes. I will talk after the break. But what we got from several global South smallholder organizations was that due diligence can become a de facto market access barrier, because what happens is that the smaller companies, if you want to do business with them, you have to educate them, you probably have to finance some measures to indeed implement proper due diligence, whereas, having business with larger companies who allegedly at least have implemented all these measures, then you don't pay or you don't have to do anything extra. So either you see some de-risking or problems in doing business with these smaller companies. And so, of course, that's not, the intention behind all these frameworks. But I'm curious whether you have any experience or examples from practice how to deal with this issue.
Thank you very much. And one more question. Yeah, Sigrid.
Yes, thank you. Law is not my field of expertise, so excuse me if I say something silly in your perspective, but this is a question related to Ukraine, and especially in the current development, actually the transformation of the agricultural sector in relation to land tenure and food security. So we see that actually more and more land is also, foreign investment is playing a role there. And that's importantly related to also cash crops for export markets. It's also important for the financial base of Ukraine. But at the same time, we see that a lot of vegetable production areas are being polluted by mines, destructed, and local food security is under pressure. So how do you consider corporate sustainability in relation to this aspect of domestic food security and international trade?
Thank you very much. And by the way, elephant in the room was mentioned, investors. What is the investors' impact in our country is also very important. So, Sonja, to you, questions about NEP and infrastructure projects, and then also the question from Martijn about small companies, and the question about food security, investors, land market in Ukraine. Probably we can try to respond.
Okay, so I will be short and then during the break we can continue. So yes, you're right actually that during 2023, Ministry for Human Rights was very open, and actually we started together with UNDP and Ministry for Human Rights joint cooperation regarding national baseline assessment and the national action plan. But what happened usually in Serbia, we had elections in December. And after election, during 2024, almost the whole last year, we didn't have ministry. We didn't know who will be the minister. We didn't have the government until the summer. And then first official meeting that we had with the ministry happened end of the September. And then because of this political change also inside of the ministry, they were not so much open about national action plan. They're still very much interested in, but they will not like to be the leading ministry regarding drafting and organizing this multi-stakeholder dialogue in Serbia. But what is important that my impression is that we still have them as an important player, but I'm not sure that they will be the one to lead the process. The Ministry for European Integration was mentioning and the Chamber of Commerce, but let's see what will happen about that. And in the afternoon, I will talk about national baseline assessment. So I will mention also some other things. And if I can just shortly reflect about this question about due diligence, because I would really like to share this example about Serbia. I'm not sure that anybody of you know about that. At the end of the November, Amnesty International published a report about the spyware, which was actually about the spyware and the attacks about human rights defenders and the journalists. What is very important and why I think I need to reflect about due diligence is that actually this spyware, the software called Celebrite, was our government get it through the Norwegian embassy and the Norwegian MFA. Plus, one UN agency was involved just because they needed to do the public procurement procedure. And I think that this example is also a recent example that happened 3 months ago, opened everything that we are talking right now about Serbia, which is a candidate country. We don't have everything that EU country had, but Norwegian government actually, we don't know why this case is still ongoing, thought that this equipment will be very important to Serbian government, not because they need to spy human rights defenders and journalists, but to stop organized crime. That was the reasoning behind. But why due diligence didn't happen in place, although this happened in 2018? This is information that we have. But why nobody in that chain of Norwegian embassy, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, UN agency didn't do proper due diligence because they were obliged to do so? And what happened at the end? That our government, our Ministry of Interior, and our Secret Service used that software and that spyware to spy human rights defenders and journalists doing their job. And not only when this report was published in November, but this practice continue after, and it's happening right now. And yeah. I don't know if I feel safe, but I'm probably not safe because all of us after this, we are not using our phones anymore for any kind of conversation. We are shutting down, putting in another place. Many of our colleagues bought now iPhones because they are more secure and they can record this attack coming from different kind of spywares. But generally, people are not feeling safe anymore. And there is a huge pressure now in Serbia towards all civil society organizations, including my own organization, my own staff. That's why I just wanted to reflect on something that is really real example happening in this moment right now. And I think that you all should be aware about that.
If I can Just continue, and of course that also shows that protecting civil spaces is actually key, and we cannot also expect, it's related also to rule of law and democracy, and we cannot expect to have the favorable environment for corporate corporate due diligence, if we do not have those preconditions, and unfortunately this is not only an issue in some of the countries that were mentioned, but also in some of the European Union countries. So I would like to reflect on the SME angle that was mentioned, because this is also quite frequently raised to us as a working group. How all of this relates to SMEs, and whether they will be the privileged when the so-called responsible companies cut on the supply chain with the small companies that do not have capacities. So it is really an issue for small and medium enterprises, the capacity issue. And if we talk about examples, of course, the good example is the German help desk in Serbia, that is actually also addressing this issue where the SMEs could get some consultations. But I think it is very important also to work with the companies, with the bigger companies, that in their supply chain, that they do not just say, okay, you don't comply, so you are out of the game, but that they also work on educating the SMEs and actually helping them to comply. And I remember 20 years ago when we started the discussions on responsible businesses, even more than 20 years ago in my own country, Lithuania, some of the big businesses, in particular supermarkets, they were acting in such a way that they were saying, okay, you don't comply, that's your problem. So we give you the contract, it says what you have to do, and we don't care. And now when I compare the situation now, it's completely different. So they're interested to work with those SMEs. So I think this is one way for the SMEs to address those issues, because clearly to address the capacity issue for the SMEs themselves is very, very challenging and difficult.
Is it okay if I just want to actually answer that question with a kind of flip side of the coin from our experience? So last year we hosted there was a third UN African Forum, on business and human rights, hosted with the African Union and the UN. And we were talking to some small and medium enterprises that were participating in the forum, and there was one person who said, okay, my company, they're an agricultural sort of producer in Eastern Africa. Our company has taken the step. We're doing our human rights due diligence. Here's the steps that we're taking. We're doing our best. And we're not rewarded for it yet. And my CEO, it's a small and medium enterprise, but okay, the head of the company basically says to me, how long are we going to keep doing this for? Because it's costing us vis-a-vis our competitors, we're losing out. So you can look at it a different way. How do you incentivize those companies? How long do you leave them hanging, essentially? Because you've got companies like that who are taking the leap, for lack of a better term. They're doing human rights due diligence again. So how do you match them? How do you incentivize them? And also, how do you match incentives and match them with larger companies, like you said, who have them in their supply chains and so on? I don't know the answer. I don't have that. But I will say that there is also that consideration of, you can't have these companies do that for too long before they're seen as losing out to their competitors just by virtue of actually doing it or investing, in human rights due diligence, bearing the additional cost and so on. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe I can also add to that question, because obviously in the OECD, it's also a big issue. And of course, capacity building, I think it's the first important element. And then we keep saying, well, due diligence has to be risk-based and proportional. And the risk-based you can learn, that's not difficult. But the proportional, that's the tricky one. And in our experience, legislation, and this is the key problem at the moment, mandatory legislation that is not applicable to SMEs at all does not help them. Because then we have the spillovers. That's what happens in Germany. We have the big companies saying, well, it doesn't say in the law, but for me, it's so much easier. If you're the SME that I'm purchasing from, I'm just asking you to fulfill the same requirements, and I'm off the hook. And this is why we're currently thinking about how can we spell out that proportionality for SMEs? What needs to be said in the mandatory law in order to protect SMEs? I think it's really a complete error to think in a liberal way. It's good not to say anything. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, and question about food security investors, and I can just start, you can add then. I think that our countries, I think that for Serbia it's also relevant, but for Ukraine for sure, we are trying to balance, investors, we need investments, and also national security, food security, and how to do this in balanced way, in the right way. It's a huge challenge. And basically what news that came to us last days, it's also about investments, right? And there is a try to frame this as an investment. And that's why the question for our countries is about responsible investors are so crucial. And that's why Maryna is from the Department of Investments as well.
Yes, it's a really complicated question, and because of we have different authorities which are responsible for different areas, and of course now the one of the main goal to attract investors, and we have many like conferences, forums on attracting investors, on launching the cooperation with international businesses, and our role is of course to speak about RBC, to include RBC issues into the reconstruction and recovery of Ukraine. And by the way, we will have this URC in 2025 in Italy, and this is the first time when at the agenda it will be RBC panel. So it's
it's a big win.
Yeah.
Of Ministry of Economy. Thank you very much for your insights. It was very interesting panel discussion. Thank you for questions. And I should announce that we will have very interesting presentations in the second part of the day. We will talk about model clauses. We will talk about international implications, and I believe about deforestation we will also mention. And we will talk about conflict and business and human rights. Eva doesn't look at me, but we will. And and also Ukrainian perspective we will also cover, and Sonja will tell us about National Action Plan and National Baseline Assessment. Thank you very much, and lunchtime.